Do you guys ever end up selling a piece of gear and kind of regretting it, or maybe not regretting, but just kind of missing it, you know? Like if you could have chose to keep both of them, you probably would have. And that's what today's video is about. Just some Micro Four Thirds gear I've used in the past that I really enjoyed that just over time kind of fell short, didn't quite make the cut. So let's get into it. These are 5 things in the Lumix Micro Four Thirds world that I not necessarily regret selling, but I definitely miss sometimes. The first one is kind of 3-in-1. We're already cheating the list, but that's my Pro Telephoto Zooms for Micro Four Thirds. You know, I did a whole video on the best Pro Telephoto lenses for Micro Four Thirds, and we looked at the Olympus 40-150, the Leica 50-200, and the original Lumix 35-100. I enjoy all 3 of those lenses for different reasons, but in the past, I ended up going with the Olympus, and honestly, these days, I might go with the Leica, but I actually don't have any of those lenses anymore, since for my telephoto needs, I have switched to S-series lenses and used the 70-200 f4. Just kind of did everything all those lenses did in one. It had a little bit more blur than, you know, even the f2.8 versions did. It had the same reach as the old 35-100. It had the clutch of the Olympus. It had the image stabilization and the parfocalness of the Leica lens. It loses a little bit of reach compared to some of those. And obviously I'm locked down to a full frame body for that, but it just felt like a culmination of all the technology of those previous lenses all put into one. I still prefer my Leica 25-50 for like the medium telephoto ranges, but for long range stuff like wedding ceremonies, that's where the 70-200 comes out. But I don't know, something about the Micro Four Thirds lenses had a little bit extra, you know, sauce on it. It had a close focus feature or an extended zoom range or something that just made it, I don't know, that makes me wish I still had one laying around. Next up are 2 more lenses, and those are going to be the Leica and the Lumix 42.5 millimeters. We've got a 1.2 with the Leica. I've made a few videos on it, and then the Lumix is actually an even cheaper 1.7 version, and I think this might be one of the best value lenses for the Micro Four Thirds system. It's got a 42.5 millimeter, nice 85 millimeter portrait range equivalence, 1.7 aperture, and a really close focus distance. I know Shane from Geeky Nerdy Techie did a video on it recently, and I thought really kind of summarized the points of that lenses and the strengths of it pretty well. I love the Leica too. It just had such creamy backgrounds and character and blurriness, but again, both of those lenses got traded up, the 1.7 to the 1.2, and then the 1.2 went with some other stuff to help afford the Leica 25-50, which, while I know is optically a little bit better, it's also a little bit slower and has less of that really great character that I loved from the Leica, although I didn't love exactly the chromatic aberration that came with it as well. But if you're wanting the 25-50 or you have the 10-25, for example, that 42.5 1.7 is not as good, but for a prime lens and how small it is, that thing's amazing. So if you just can't quite afford that 25-50 yet, or the Leica 1.2 yet, I would look into maybe that 1.7. But those are great lenses, and I took some of my very first like actor headshots and portraits with them, and I really, really enjoyed those little lenses. The next thing is technically a Micro Four Thirds camera, even though it never quite used the entire sensor, but that's gonna be the LX100. I had the Mark I, not the Mark II, which has a few updates and maybe a touchscreen and some stuff. But the simplicity of a tiny, compact lens with a 24-70, 1.7 to 2.8, I just really loved the body, the vintage controls. There's a few things that were frustrating about it, but I did really enjoy the camera for what it was worth, although it just never quite held up in like a professional shooting situation, and I couldn't really use it on weddings or things like that for professional work, but it was a great travel camera. Unfortunately, this little guy, the G100, ended up kind of replacing that camera after a while. I realized I could put more professional lenses on it, I could interchange the lenses, and I always kind of wanted like a fixed lens kind of LX100, and while this doesn't have the same vintage controls and stuff that I liked in that sense, it has more utility with a flip out screen, selfie screen, And I can put something like this 15mm prime on it and gain an extra control ring, which is really nice. So I do regret that nice zoom range, but if I bring this and like maybe the 14 to 140 on a vacation, that's an amazing value. And with a 30 or 10-minute record limit, this can still be useful for some DE, you know, way down the line cameras. So I think for me, the updated firmware and the interchangeable lenses works for me for the G100, but the LX100 and the LX100 II still call my name from time to time, and I just think like how simple and an all-in-one package those lenses are, but I couldn't quite afford to have both, so here we are. My new travel camera is this G100 here, but LX100 is still calling my name every once in a while. Do miss that guy every once in a while, for sure. The next thing is gonna be the Voigtlander prime lenses. You know, I see reviews of those. I see things shot with them all the time. And I do miss that set, and I regret not being able to test all of them. I never got my hands on the 28mm, 29mm, or the 60mm. And I still have the 10.5, which let me know if you want a review on that. There's not that much information on that lens somehow, but the versatility of those lenses are great. Like I've got dedicated cinema lenses now from Midicon, review coming soon. But I don't know, the versatility of the Voigtlanders are great. You know, super dreamy wide open, pretty clinical, stop down to f2 or even 1.4. And they could also be used for video and cinema and photography, you know, whereas dedicated cinema lenses like the Midicons I'm gonna test out soon, just feel like wrong for photos and feel a little bit too flashy and less subtle. You know, you can't, the switching between the clicks on the Voigtlanders, the manual focus, the relatively consistent filter threads, and the relatively small size, which made them really great for the format of Micro Four Thirds, was a great thing to have with those Voigtlander lenses. And while I do appreciate the built-in gears and the, you know, character of the Midicon lenses, and the price is a little bit, you know, friendlier too, I do still think about those Voigtlanders and wish I had them for photo shoots or, you know, video, and I miss the smaller size of them compared to some of these cinema lenses. So yeah, and you know, let's just move on to the last one now too. I definitely am a little bit nostalgic and miss the old GH5. You know, I traded it to the Mark II, which I probably should have done a video on, or maybe still should. It's a great camera, and if you're not interested in the autofocus of the G9 II and the GH6 is a little overkill, the GH5 II is still a great camera. But the original GH5, it had so few limitations and things holding it back. You know, we had the autofocus, and we only had 4K 60 at 8-bit. And besides that, it had everything that I needed and not much more. And I do enjoy the GH6 a lot. I love the image, I love the organic feel of the sensor, I love the full vlog and a lot of other stuff, the included vlog. But, you know, I do really still respect and appreciate the GH5 and wish I could justify one being around, but I've got a stabilized S5 II, a stabilized GH6, and having the GH5 or the GH5 Mark II sitting on a tripod, wasting that great stabilization just didn't feel like the best use of my gear. And so I felt the GH5S made a lot more sense. But there is something to be said about just how well that GH5 performed. And for anybody in 2023 and onwards watching this, GH5 is still a great camera, and especially for the price you can find it for, a weather-sealed, super rugged, long battery, 4K 60 with no additional crops camera. I don't know if there are really any other competitors that ever have beat the pure just value of a GH5. So I think back and I miss the better battery life and the simplicity and all that stuff. But, you know, I think all this gear really is more closely tied to our memories of the times we used that gear and the projects we worked on it with than anything. You know, I get nostalgic about selling gear off, especially if the GH5 made some of my favorite films and series I've worked on, and the same with the GH4 before that. And letting it go was, you know, more. It took me longer than it probably should have, you know, and it is an interesting thing being nostalgic and like connected to a camera in that way. But it's something that, you know, technology always moves forward, and when it moves forward, whether you need to be an early adopter or be thinking about purchasing a new camera or upgrading or anything in the future, I know for me at least it's usually a very long consideration before figuring out if I really need something, you know. Did the 10-25 or the 25-50 Leicas make my life easier or make my work better? And I think the answer to both of those is yes. But could I be doing just as good a work or almost as good a work with the GH5 and that old Lumix 42.5 1.7? Or could I be shooting just as good of films on the Voigtlanders? That's also probably true. So it's a personal choice when to move on and why and when to let these items go to someone who might be able to get better and more use out of them. But it's an inevitable thing too. So yeah, I just wanted to reminisce about, you know, some of my favorites, old gear that for one reason or another had to go to eBay or, you know, wherever I ended up selling it. But yeah, so definitely comment down below, guys. What has been some of your gear that you've sold that you, again, either regret or just miss shooting with, you know, because even I miss the camcorder days, you know, just having an autofocus all-in-one 28-500 zoom right in your hand, and that simplicity, that built-in all-in-one package is useful. But would I be getting the same jobs and doing the same kind of work if all I shot on still was an old Canon camcorder? You know, I guess maybe, but probably not. And so knowing when and how to upgrade is important. So yeah, definitely leave it down below and start a conversation. What's some gear you sold and you regret? What's some gear you sold and just miss, even though you know deep down it was time to move on? I'd love to hear some more thoughts from you guys on this sort of thing, because and also let me know, do you have a nostalgia for your equipment? You know, do you have like weird emotional attachments to gear you own currently or have owned in the past? Because I feel like everybody has that one camera or lens that is so nostalgic or so relevant to their career that they're not going to give up for a long time, if ever. And that stuff is really interesting too. So definitely let me know that as well, because I would really love to see if you guys have that one piece of gear that maybe you should have sold but didn't. So anyway, thanks for stopping by, guys, listening to this, and I'll see you in the next video.